The Winstanley estate is the second largest of Battersea's post-war public housing projects. Its long drawn-out construction, stretching between 1956 and 1972, meant that it was far from a single planned entity. But the portion built in 1963 to 1966 to designs by George True and Dunn has a coherence of design lacking in any other post-war housing built in Battersea. The physical character of the area north of Clapham Junction is conveyed in a memoir by James Guttridge, brought up during the 1920s in Benfield Street off York Road, which ran through what is now York Gardens, a short, slightly crescented street of about 60 houses, with some high stink poles, as sewer vents were known, as its only ornament. Each house contained at least 2, but mostly 3 families, remembered Guttridge, so there was a right assortment to create a lively neighbourhood.
Palaces, aren't they? You know, if I get a knocker, that's like a non-payer.
He supplies a minute description of how the houses were inhabited. For instance, that there were coal chutes in the pavement, but they were never really used, and front doors were generally unlocked or had a key on a string. Plans for the triangle between Winstanley, Grant and Plough Roads were finalised and built between 1963 and 1966. A site factory beside St Peter's Church, staffed by a 20-man crew, opened in July 1964 to begin efficient industrialised construction of the Winstanley estate. Here, and on the building site itself, a novel type of portal crane, Little David, was used for casting, striking out, lifting and placing, and in the initial stages, erection of the actual production line. During construction, the crane moved sequentially along the east-west circulation routes and in and out of each courtyard in turn. Floor slabs and external walls at ground level were of in-situ concrete, while most of the upper portions of the structure were cast in the factory. End walls were generally of brick. The bulk of the estate relied on the geometry of a series of 4- and 5-storey maisonette blocks, set at right angles to form regular courts facing in alternate directions, while a second-floor circulation deck threaded through the blocks. Winstanley Road, forming the triangle's eastern flank, had a thin tower, Spall Court, just 2 rooms deep, and now of 22 storeys at its north end, and 3 square squat towers of 11 storeys, Clark Lawrence, Shaw and Sendall Courts, set below it in diagonal echelon. Following the government's Parker-Morris report of 1961, internal space standards were improved from original plans. And play areas received fresh attention.
Once you're off the ground floor, where can they play? There's no one to see, no one to talk to except the birds when they're not crapping all over the place.
The low-rise blocks on the Winstanley estate, built in 1964, soon showed signs of trouble. Their lifts were exposed to rain at ground floor level and often failed. A vociferous Winstanley Estate Tenants Association was therefore vexed when in 1967 the estate won a Royal Institute of British Architects Medal for good design.
You bastard! You bloody bastard!
A facelift in 1982 finally remedied some of the faults the tenants complained of. Despite evident wealth and investment, areas of Battersea that had been poor in the 19th century have remained so, as in many areas of inner London. The influx of middle-class professionals from the late 1960s onwards was matched by the exodus of most of the area's skilled manual workforce. There remained largely the elderly and those with special housing and social needs, the unemployed, single-parent families and large immigrant groups. A 2006 study showed that northern districts around Battersea Park Road were in a state of serious social deprivation. The worst problems centre on the swathes of public housing, the Patmore, Doddington, York Road and Winstanley estates. once beacons of hope after slum clearance and war damage. The 19th century social researcher Charles Booth might recognise in Battersea today the same, more than usual mix of wealth and poverty, the respectable and the squalid, that he found here more than 100 years ago.
I was born in Battersea. I lived all my life in Battersea, so I don't want to go and get buried in Wandsworth, do I?